Hello, and welcome to this week's discussion of Parshat Vayeshev. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to take a look at the comments below and say the blessing out loud for yourself to sanctify and elevate this moment of studying Torah. This week's Parsha opens with an interesting line that this is Jacob's legacy and these are the generations, Joseph. It's interesting that it starts not in chronological order or birth order, but with his 11th of 12 sons, his favorite of all of his sons. And it's apparent. I mean, he gives him a technicolor dream coat. There's all sorts of stories that we're familiar with to demonstrate just how much Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. And I kind of get the sense in this week's Torah portion that it continues along this succession-esque passing on the family business. And you can see even more so Jacob's favoritism to Joseph in the way that he's apparently grooming him to take on that family business. Jacob, remember, was super successful. He worked for Lavan for 20 years and he built up a fortune multiple times. So we know that Jacob knows every intricate detail how to run a successful business. And there's this way that he is giving Joseph unique insights how to run a business and how to run the family legacy, different than he's giving to the other brothers. And so on a layer deeper of the way in which the brother's jealousy shows up and how angry they are at his brother is when Joseph tells him of the dreams where his brothers are going to bow down to him. But in that second dream in particular, there's this line here where he talks about how the sun and the moon and the 11 stars are going to bow down to him. And his brothers, Yekanu Bo, they were jealous of him. They had this envy. And his dad, Jacob, though, when saying, is this meant to mean that your mother and I are going to bow down to you also? While his brothers, Yekanu Bo, are jealous of him, Jacob shamar hadavar. He guarded it, like Shamor Bezachor the Shabbat. He took this on as a different understanding and going, something really is special about Joseph. And so this builds even more into the sibling rivalry. And so that just further alienates the brothers. So how do we get to this point? Getting to the point where the brothers are so envious and they hate him so much that they want to conspire to kill him. Last week we learned about Jacob being such a successful father that all of the sons and his family were going to carry on this family legacy, that it almost doesn't make sense that his sons would get to the point that they would think about committing such a heinous act as to kill one of their own. And so Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks has a fascinating insight, and it goes back to understanding the Hebrew in a way that it doesn't quite grammatically translate to English. So there's this line, it's a couple lines before the telling of the dream, where it says, Vayishenu oto velo yechol dabra leshalom, which can only be read in English. It says, they hated him and they weren't even able to speak to him in peace. But the grammatical way to understand this differently from Hebrew is because of the way that they hated him, they couldn't even speak to him in a way that, as our parents taught us, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. And so for years, his brothers might not have even talked to him. And when they weren't engaging with him, that's when the resentment started to build. And we can learn from this the critical importance of speaking with one another, finding ways to engage and to actually speak out loud, not just think it. Think about what we talked about before of the power of saying a blessing out loud, the power of sanctifying a moment out loud, the power of saying thank you. You can't just think, oh, thank you for that gift, but you have to actually say it so that you engage in an exchange with the person whom you're thanking. And so what we need to do is to speak with one another, not to become monolithic, not that we have to agree on every point, not that we have to convince each other, but to engage with one another, to continue to recognize the divine spark in each and every one of us. And without that connection, we can lose sight of that so easily. And when I was learning about this and thinking about this week's Parsha, I thought a lot about this last year. This year in particular, not just with the political divides that are existing in our country, and not just the way in which the ongoing war, the devastating fact that there are still 100 hostages in captivity 400 days later, the fact that people have lost friends in this year. It's because we can't talk to each other. We've lost that ability to engage in discourse. Now, there's a whole other side of when enemies intentionally use tools like anti-normalization to prevent that type of connection with one another. And that saddens me even more because they know the power of dialogue and engagement. But I am thinking also of the way in which social media has impacted and hurt us as a society. If you haven't seen it yet or read it, Jonathan Haidt just wrote another fascinating and important critical book called The Anxious Generation, which talks about the ways in which smartphones and social media have driven us further apart and made us, as the title suggests, more anxious. It's because it's a unilateral engagement. We've never been more connected in ways to the entire global humanity, but at the same time, we've never been more disconnected from each other's humanity. There was an experiment that I learned about that I just watched a short video in, I believe it was England, where students agreed to participate where for 21 days they did not use their phones. Not just just at school in the classroom, but for 21 days they engaged with zero technology. And even in 21 days, the change and the impact was remarkable. Their teachers and themselves noticed a drop in anxiety. They were more eager to learn. They were more attentive. Their eye contact with each other and with their teachers increased. And they found new ways to play and enjoy and just engage with life when getting away from these devices. And so if Jacob's sons could get to a point where even if they're not speaking to one another, they could commit an idea or an atrocity such as wanting to kill their brother. Imagine how much more so us in today's modern times would be if we're not engaging on a routine basis in that kind of a way. And so as we enter into Shabbat, as we think about what it means to have this break from the outside mundane world to engage with one another on the things that matter most in Shabbat, as Abraham Joshua Heschel teaches, an island in time and space, let's go into this Shabbat thinking of ways to focus on what matters, to finding the divine spark in one another, and to create the kinds of relationships where even if we don't agree with one another, we never lose sight of how important it is to be connected with one another. Shabbat Shalom.